Welcome to the big episode 350 of the Shared Security Podcast. That's right,
It's a
folks.
huge episode.
350. What a historic
The
milestone.
biggest episode we've
It
done
is.
so far. The biggest number,
That's
anyway.
right. And Kevin's not here.
Yeah, he may drop in.
He may just drop in. I know he's at a conference this week. But yeah, we'll be talking a little bit about the podcast history
Oh, that'll be
and
fun. Yeah.
discuss how far we've come after 15 years of doing this podcast.
15 years. That's right.
It's amazing. 15 years is a long time. It's a long time. But as for stories, I did want to cover something. Maybe it's more of a PSA, but there's a big hurricane that actually, when we're recording this, it is hitting Florida today. And our thoughts are out to all the people in Florida. Hope everyone's doing well. But natural disasters are happening anywhere really in the world these days. So we'll share some advice that if you have a new iPhone or Android, you can actually use the satellite system to communicate in one of these emergencies. So we'll share some information about that.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. And then in our Aware Much segment, Scott is going to talk about, despite the continuing online threat environment that we all live in, users aren't changing their behavior much at all. So we'll talk about maybe why that is. So Scott, this is episode 350, but I actually did a little more research, and we actually are now at this is 477 episodes that we have
when you
recorded.
combine the monthlies and the weeklies that you started doing in between them, and then we've kind of merged them, right? So you had to, that must have been a numbering challenge when you decided to merge things.
Not really. There's actually, I just counted, there's a in the podcast feed.
Yeah.
It actually gives
you
the
index number.
In the index number. Yeah. So 477 episodes when we started this in 2009 as the social media security
What
podcast.
were some of the things going on in 2009, Tom, at that time?
The only things that were really going on that we were involved with was social media.
Facebook was big.
Twitter.
Well, actually, around that time,
Twitter wasn't big at all.
It was, Twitter had just started. But I remember like maybe a year after we started, Facebook went public.
Yes.
For
that's right.
20 billion or something? I can't remember what the number was.
Yeah. It was crazy. And then we had started this podcast shortly after the DEF CON talk that Kevin and I gave called Social Zombies, Your Friends Want to Eat Your Brains. And we had Facebook developers in the audience, and they were questioning
not happy
not happy about the things that we were showing and demoing that you could do with third-party Facebook apps at the time.
And imagine all the vulnerabilities that existed then, right?
Oh, there was tons. It was amazing. And this was before Facebook even had a security team.
Yep.
So things
had they opened up apps
changed a lot.
Remember they started doing the app API, and people were developing all the apps that would ask you for your favorite color and your mother's maiden name and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean that was what they were doing back then. It was developers had full control of those APIs and the data that was being collected from all of that, and it was the Wild West. It was insane. It was just
and we talked
crazy
about
days.
Kind of like legendary stories, right? Remember there was I can't remember the full name, Robin somebody. There was a
the first like LinkedIn social engineering.
Who is
Robin Sage?
Robin Sage, yeah. Who is this person, right? And so there was a big debate about whether it was a real person or not.
This was to kind of showcase the fake profile problem on LinkedIn. And this was going way back. This is 2010, maybe 2011 when LinkedIn first started. And it gave a lot of visibility to, you can't trust everyone that connects with you on LinkedIn. And now it's even gotten worse with AI.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I remember it wasn't long after that. I'm sure there was some statistic that was published that said 50% of new LinkedIn profiles were fake.
Yes.
I don't know if that number's changed.
I think it's gotten worse, to be honest. I think with the way that AI is being used to create these personas, and it's very hard to trust. I go back to the rule that we've always said on LinkedIn is like, you shouldn't connect with people unless you've actually had a conversation with them. either virtually or in person.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know exactly who that person is. So you got to be careful.
And you also had a guide to setting social media profile privacy settings.
Yes, the Facebook Privacy and Security Guide, which I had updated for a number of years, and I would give that away essentially for free.
Yeah.
I remember at conferences I would go to, I would just have a stack, and the employer that I worked for, I would just like stick it on the table, and people would just pick it up and find it very useful. I actually had people that were saying that they were using it as part of like their security awareness programs, and
Yeah.
actually had some government agencies that were actually using it. It was pretty cool. And this was, of course, before even blogs and things picked up, or news agencies picked up, like, here's all the 10 tips to secure your Facebook account and all those things. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I was proud to be part of that back in the day. And
Yeah.
obviously, I don't do that anymore because Facebook has become this massive beast. And I don't even use Facebook anymore. I
Yeah.
don't even have an account. I deleted all that stuff years ago. So,
Yeah. So if you have one of those old guides, it's an antique almost.
Yeah, it's a piece of history, But it's
Mm.
been great, Scott. We've
Yes.
it's really great doing this podcast with you, and I know Kevin couldn't make it today, but it's been great having you both on the podcast, and I really appreciate you both.
Yeah. And,
So
we get great feedback. Everyone we talk to who listens says they love it. And, we just come and talk about stuff. Seems
yeah,
to,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. That's what this is just we have a conversation, and thanks to all of you for listening and watching us.
Yeah.
And we've seen the show grow leaps and bounds over the years, and it's just it's amazing to see that we've come this far, and we're still continuing to grow, and it's
Yep.
great.
Yep. And,
It's awesome.
also just want to thank Tom for sticking with it. It's not an easy thing to sort of schedule this stuff with three random people who are moving around the world,
We
and then produce it and publish it and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Scott. Yeah, it is challenging because we are all three of us are so busy with our day jobs and our lives and things going on, and we still try to find the time every week to do this. Well, we had that long period we were doing the monthly show,
Right.
so and the monthly show maybe sometimes turned into 2 months in between
Yeah.
shows.
It wasn't strictly speaking monthly, but we roughly did
No,
monthly.
no, we did that, and then we got back into it again. I started the weekly thing, and that was when I took it a little more
You know
seriously.
what?
I
You know
think
what
just
kind of
like
I
getting
think
it out.
solidified our consistency is the ability to do online calendar scheduling.
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah, that's helped me immensely because trying to coordinate schedules between three people
Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
easy. So Calendly and all of that has
And
helped.
there was a time I remember when we used to cover online calendars. Are they safe to use?
The answer is yes. They make your lives a million times easier, and I use them for work. I can't live without it.
There are
So
certainly vulnerabilities that I'm sure we talked about or that you could
yeah,
envision, but it can compared to the value you get, it's one of those
that's
risk
right.
trade-offs you're willing to make these days.
Risk trade-offs and threat model. That's right. Well, with that, let's jump into our I guess we'll call this one a PSA, but
Yeah.
if you do happen to have a iPhone 14, 15 or 16 with iOS 16.1, you can actually use that device now for emergency communication via satellite. So a lot of people don't realize this that they have this capability, which is pretty
Yeah,
cool if
that's
there
new to
was
me.
a
I didn't realize that
disaster.
was even coming. So yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I think this got a lot more media attention because of the situation that happened in North Carolina with that last storm that literally, unfortunately, I mean, geez, it wiped out Asheville, North Carolina completely, and cell phone service was completely down for days. I think it's just now they're starting to get that infrastructure back up. It's a terrible situation, but people found that if they had this latest iPhone, they could still send text messages and communicate to their friends and family that they're okay.
Yeah.
So this is a very important feature that everyone should know about. And if you have an Android phone, there's actually some new things that came out with that as well. So if you have a Pixel 9 or Pixel 9 Pro, you can actually use the same features that are available in the iPhone for satellite messaging And in fact, SpaceX has actually done a partnership with T-Mobile customers to give they call it like a temporary texting option. So even if you don't have one of the latest Pixels, apparently there is a way that you can use these Starlink devices to communicate as well. So lots of options, which is great. And if you're really, I won't say like a survivalist, but we actually did an episode a couple years ago on ham radio, amateur radio. And I know that that is another method that people have been using to communicate. There's a lot of talk going on Twitter now about you have to have a license to communicate on a amateur radio frequency that's designated for a license. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if there is an emergency situation, you could basically throw all of that out the window.
Yeah.
So the government here, in the US, the FCC, they do allow for emergency communications, but there are other ways if you have handheld radios to communicate, which we won't go into that, but I'll link in the show notes. We did a really good episode with two people that actually had ham licenses, and they talk about a lot of that. So if that's interesting to you, you can check that out. So with that, let's jump into the segment that we just keep doing for
no reason.
Because I don't know reason at all, but it does provide a where much.
Yeah, who came up with that stupid name anyway?
I don't know who did that.
So in this segment, I actually didn't do my research, so I'm going to be depending on Tom to kind of lay out the details. But essentially, Consumer Reports has done a survey and discovered something interesting about what general individuals are doing about cybersecurity. So what did we learn, Tom?
We didn't learn that not much has changed at all. Yeah, unfortunately, despite the recent threat landscape, because we all know it's bad out there, right? That's why you all are listening to this podcast, because try to stay up to date on all the latest threats and vulnerabilities and exploits and everything that's going on out there. It's not a pretty picture at all. But users just are not changing their behavior. Things like password managers is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been great adoption of password managers, even though we keep telling people, get a password manager, use a password manager. People still are not adopting that.
Yeah.
And there just hasn't been a lot of change in consumer behavior. So as the survey kind of points out, it's only been a slight uptick in terms of like software updates, like people updating their PCs, updating their laptops, their phones. It's just not increasing at the level that you would think that cybersecurity issues has in the news. It's always in the mainstream media. You're always hearing about breaches and data breaches and attacks. And still, with all of that, there seems to be just this complacency from a consumer perspective to do anything about it.
I don't know that it's actually complacency, as you would define it. It is, in my view, more confusion and being overwhelmed. I think fundamentally, when you look at how technology has accelerated over the last couple of millennia, right? I mean, for centuries, humans would live with the same technologies, same methods, same processes, and you get used to how you manage risks in each of those situations, right? You get your advice from your grandmother, your mother, and not to trust strangers or whatever. And so it was pretty rare that you really had to change or take note of something new that you had to do, right? But essentially the fact that technology changes so quickly now that people haven't even had a chance to adjust to the last version of the iPhone that they had that now has, fingerprints on it or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's just one of those sort of characteristics or attributes of the human environment, right? And the trust that we all have. It all comes down to how we trust people. And that's, in my view, something that is becoming sort of lost because we start to trust technology. We're told, okay, well, there should be firewalls, there should be, password rules, or password rules is a bad idea or a bad example, but antivirus, host intrusion detection, all these things that are looking out for us, right? And the better they get, the less we're called on to make decisions that are important about risk. But those decisions that you do get called on are more important than the ones you used to have to make. And so it's a very interesting kind of paradox that I think we're in. And it doesn't really surprise me, the numbers that we're getting from these reports. When you talk about password managers, I use a password manager. Every security professional I know uses a password manager, but I know a lot of people that don't. And when I ask them why, I say, well, I tried and it was too cumbersome. I didn't work. The most frequently used ones are the ones that are built into the browsers. And we've talked about that,
Yeah.
that those aren't ideal, but it's better than nothing in a lot of cases. If you look
Yes.
at your general risk for an individual, if you're not being specifically targeted because you're a subversive or in the media or
Right.
some part of the population that's being targeted. So I think it's a really interesting problem that is going to be around for a long time.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. I also think that it's weird. Like take like VPNs as an example. I feel like we're at a point where it's overhyped on the consumer side. Obviously, the VPN vendors are like, you have to use a VPN for everything. Like it's an extra layer of protection. But I always go back to people's threat and risk models, right? If like, am I going to recommend now every time you go to a Starbucks, you need to make sure you're using a VPN? I would say if you are on your corporate laptop and you're using your work laptop, right?
Mhm.
Like your company is going to have some type of VPN
Yeah.
or other cloud solution or whatever that's going to protect that data.
Yes.
If they don't, then they may have bigger issues. But again, if you're just on your personal laptop and you're on Facebook or Instagram,
Yeah.
do you really need to be using a VPN at Starbucks?
Well, it's a really good
Honestly.
question. So I would look at like a wireless attack in most cases is an opportunistic threat, right? They're going to be looking who's vulnerable, who can I actually access. But in some cases, a Starbucks near the headquarters of Apple or Facebook or whatever is going to
Yeah.
be a targeted attack because they know there are going to be people coming there from that organization. So I think you're right, Tom. It's what is your risk profile, and not only personally, but from your business point of view. And
Yeah.
that's something that is really difficult to teach, I think, the average individual. But from a business point of view, I think there is a lot of room there for improvement.
Yeah, because it's confusing to people and it's sending mixed messages, unfortunately. But I think there's things that we all agree on that people should do. Like we all agree everybody should be using some type of password manager and there are things like multi-factor authentication should always be enabled. Like there's the
Yeah.
basics, but then there's the things that are like optional, right? Like VPN is optional
Yeah.
depending on your threat or risk
Yeah.
model. And then there's some other things as well. But, patching as an example, you should always keep your systems up to
Yeah.
date and patch the latest security updates. But those are also things that are very hard because even with automatic updates installed, a lot of people ignore, because they're working on their computer and they're like, I don't want this thing to
Yeah.
reboot
Yeah.
like right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when do I reboot it? And then I forget about rebooting it
Yeah.
because I'm actually using my computer for
And
actual
even,
work.
well, I don't know if this is still the
Yeah.
case, but even like individual applications, like your browser, if Chrome needs to update, it used to be you'd
Yeah.
have to restart the browser, right? And I don't know if that's still the case. Maybe for some
Yes.
updates, it does require that. But I know people that have 30 or 40 tabs open and they say, I'm not going to close my browser. I'm going to lose all
Uh,
this.
I'm one of those actually, and I actually have right now an update window. It says click here to update in Chrome. It'll reopen all your tabs, but a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, I got to click a button and I'm going to reload
Yeah.
everything."
Yeah. And
What if something doesn't
how much of
reload?
what
Like
I
what?
needed in there was
Yeah,
cached, right? I mean,
right.
it's an interesting. I mean, more and more web-based services are
Yeah,
doing sort of single
of
keystroke updates, right? So everything you type ends up getting
course.
backed up. So it shouldn't be that much of a problem to close a tab, but it's scary for people.
Yeah. Well, by the way, after this podcast, I will be updating my Chrome browser. But again, like I'm not going to do it right now. I'm recording a podcast,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yep. So it's like I said, it's not a huge surprise that we don't see a lot more adoption. And just one other thing I think is worth saying is we do get a lot of debates among especially security professionals of whether user awareness is important or effective at all, right? And whether it's a little bit effective or a lot effective, I think it comes down to layered security, right? I mean, if you're depending only on one layer of security, especially if you're only depending on user security, then you don't have layered security. But if you have technology, you've got processes and policies, and you've got your people who have the ability to spot things and avoid potential threats, or at least report something if they see a bad or an unexpected outcome. Then the people are a part of that. And I don't think you can say just because any single attack might be able to exploit any given person that user awareness is not valuable. So it is an augmentation of the security layers provided by the processes and the technologies. So I think we have to keep the pressure on, keep valuing that training. But it is important that people actually pay attention to it and learn from the user awareness, and that you can actually measure it and understand whether it's having any impact on their knowledge or not. And that's my cue to talk about ClickArmor, because ClickArmor brings you the aware much segments of these podcasts. But that's what we do at ClickArmor, is we actually do the front end of user awareness training better than anyone else. We've been told this by people who worked at other awareness training companies, saying this is the best we've seen. And it's because we do it at the beginning, not just push people through it and then test them to see if they learned anything. We actually try and get foundational learning right at the beginning and have people engaged so that they understand what they're reading, what they're seeing, and understand risk situations. So that would allow people to spot things in the real world that they may not otherwise be able to see, even in live phishing simulations. There are some scenarios you can't simulate with live phishing simulations that we can with what we call our virtual inbox simulations. So if you're interested in understanding where we can improve user awareness, contact us at clickarmor.ca. And that's it for this segment of Aware Much.
Thank you, Scott. As always, much appreciate the support from ClickArmor of the podcast. I think that's all we have time for today. So we will cap off this historic episode 350. Over 15 years of doing this podcast. There'll be many more. So
great milestone. Too bad Kevin missed it. But
yes. So thank you all again for listening. And just to plug our Patreon. So if you would like to support the podcast, we do have a Patreon. So cheaper than a cup of coffee, you can support the podcast for about $3. That'd be appreciated. It helps us out, pay for all the hosting and all the back end stuff that we have to make this podcast happen every week. Much appreciated. But thank you again for listening. And until next time, stay safe, stay secure, and stay private. Thanks for watching or listening to this episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts, follow us on X at SharedSec, and help support the podcast by joining our Patreon to get ad-free episodes, bonus content, and many more exclusive supporter-only benefits. Visit sharedsecurity.net/supporter for more details.